The mysterious ruins of Hopton Castle still bear the scars of a tragic past. 400 years ago, this fortress was torn apart by a civil war siege. The small band of defenders inside, who were loyal to Parliament, gave their lives defending it against an army of King Charles I. Today, only the tower survives as witness to their heroic last stand, and nobody's got any idea what the rest of this castle looked like. So that's where we come in. We've been invited here by the local Preservation Society to try to find out, and maybe to solve a little mystery along the way. Richard, you're our castles expert, and you want us not only to sort out what the castle looked like during the Civil War, but to address the issue of a war crime.
Indeed, yes. Because not only is it a fantastic site, you've got a fantastic story with the Civil War siege and these brave garrison holding out against the Royalists for several weeks before finally surrendering and then being rather brutally murdered.
Helen, you're particularly excited about this site, aren't you?
I am, because it's got this fantastic historical account. We've got a description of what went on, written by the garrison commander, the chap who was in charge of defending this place. And it gives lots of details of the buildings that were here. But it is rather one-sided. Obviously, it's only his account. And it's a really fantastic opportunity for archaeology to find out how much of this is true.
Neil, you're the boss over the next 3 days. How are we going to tackle this site?
Very carefully. This is a very sensitive site, Tony. Not only is it a scheduled monument, a nationally important archaeological site, it's also potentially the site of a mass grave.
Yeah, I understand we have to be sensitive, but that doesn't mean we're going to ignore the bodies, does it?
No, but it's not a grave chase, Tony. What I want to do is actually use the archaeological evidence to see how reliable is this historical site. Can we get traces of the actual siege? How truthful is the history?
Most of what we know about the siege of Hopton comes from a man called Colonel Samuel Moore, the garrison commander. He wrote it all down in his journal, and it reads like a novel.
Game! Fire!
He says that the Royalists attacked the outnumbered defenders 3 times, losing hundreds of men. It was only when the attackers had the parliamentarians cornered in the tower that they finally gave up. And instead of showing mercy, the Royalist commander put everyone except Colonel Moore to the sword. But did it really happen the way he said it did? The previous excavation produced an absolute mound of pottery. Paul Blinkhorn's already identified where it was made and dated it. It seems that the building was occupied for a surprisingly short time.
There's stuff like this, which is from Lyveden, which is up in the north of Northamptonshire. It's one of the earliest glazed industries around here. Gets going round about 1200, 1210, something like that. And then there's this, which has been coming up from Oxford, or somewhere around Oxford. Now, this could be as early as 1080. They've found this stuff in the construction of Oxford Castle.
Oh, right, so giving a very precise date. And what about this bit?
Oh, that's quite nice,
completely flat, almost.
It's part of a fire cover or a curfew, hence the expression after curfew.
Yeah.
It's when you put the covers on the fire. Imagine a big bowl, but upside down, with holes in what would be the base if it was a bowl, yeah?
Yeah.
You basically put this on the fire at night. It allows the fire to smoulder all night, so you'd have to relight it in the morning.
Labour saving.
Absolutely.
So the site's starting sometime around 1100. We know it's still going sometime around 1200. What about the end?
Well, round here, there's a major medieval pottery industry at Pottersbury, which is just 3 miles down the road. This industry starts about 1250. Now, if you excavate a site dating to the late 13th or 14th century around here, you find masses of Pottersbury ware, and I do mean masses. It completely dominates the pottery assemblages. There isn't one single scrap from anywhere on this site.
Gosh, so it was completely abandoned.
It must have been.
By about 1250?
It must have gone by 1250, and this site just stopped dead.
Our diggers may find evidence for why the building was abandoned. It might have been because of what was happening on the larger stage. These were turbulent times in England.
In the 12th century, there were some really powerful kings, people like Henry I, Henry II, Richard the Lionheart, and with that power came the ability to tax and to impose fines on people. So that really impinged on people's lives. But we also had some really quite weak kings, people like Stephen and John at the end of the period, and they weren't able to keep their barons in check as successfully, and both of them faced quite major revolts during their reigns.
The The Mordwit family who owned this area were Norman nobles who'd been granted, in effect lent, land by William the Conqueror. Their estates included the nearby village of Hanslope. Like many of the nobility, by about 1200 they'd got fed up with the demands of the king. They now felt they owned this land. They were, if you like, becoming at least part English. This must be the spot where the garrison trapped and killed the first royalists to get into the castle. And it's easy to see why. Stuck in no man's land, with only smoking ruins around the courtyard for cover, they would have been cut down, just like Colonel Moore claims they were. The Journal says that after their disaster in the courtyard, the royalists changed tactics. They returned with more men, gave the garrison one last chance to surrender, and this time they meant business.
They bombard the outer wall of this castle with heavy cannon to try and make a breach in the wall.
Yeah, it says that they're shooting at the outside wall from 9 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock in the evening, and they hit it with 96 shots. By my maths, that is one shot every 5 minutes, which is an incredible amount of firepower.
It is, isn't it? I mean, in the end, it was successful. They did make a breach in that wall, and of course the defenders had rushed up and tried to stop them getting through.
It's at that point that the hand-to-hand fighting starts with the pikes and the muskets and the clubs and everything, and they're doing that for 2 hours. It must have been absolutely horrendous.
Stuart thinks the royalists bombarded the castle from the high ground, breaking down the defences in the south. And our analysis of the musket balls does suggest they were fired from some distance away, raining down on the men cowering inside the brick building.
Look what we just found. This is a lead musket ball, but it's been embedded into the brick.
It's fantastic.
So it's just hit, hasn't it? And then just flattened as it's hit the brick wall.
It's actually still got bits of brick embedded in that side, which is incredible.
Our archaeology has now built up a terrifying picture of the final 48 hours of the defenders' lives. And it backs up Colonel Moore's journal in every detail. After being bombarded by constant fire with the attackers through the breach, the defenders set the brick mansion on fire before fleeing to the tower. A terrifying sequence of events which we've found in both the archaeology and the documents. They were now at the mercy of the royalist commander, Sir Michael Woodhouse, and Richard thinks he's worked out how he forced them to surrender.
All I had to do is run up the bank and attack that. That looks like a door, but it's actually a window opening. Now, they're trapped on the top floor. They can't do anything about people attacking the bottom of the castle.
So this is another example of this building not really doing its job as a defence because it had a vulnerable window close to the ground.
Yes, because the window, either side of the window, the wall is only about that thick. So it's dead easy to actually bash through. I think what we can see there is what was done during the Civil War.
And that's what makes them give up, because they think that they're going to lay explosives, and they say it's better to surrender than to be blown up.
Yeah.
Extraordinary, isn't it, to see something so vulnerable from all those years ago that led to such a terrifying end.
Yeah.
King Alfred the Great is on the run from the Vikings, right? And he dives into this vast network of salty marshes that completely covered this area during the 9th century. And he sees this little mud hut that belongs to a swineherd and his wife, and he tells them that he's a deserter from the English army, and they agree to hide him. And the swineherd goes off and gets on with his jobs. She goes off and does her chores. And Alfred's sitting there, completely wrapped in thought, and he doesn't notice this huge black cloud pouring out of the fire, and the swineherd's wife comes back in, and she is absolutely livid. "You couldn't be bothered to keep an eye on my cakes, could you?" she says. "But you wouldn't mind shoveling them down your throat when they were baked, would you, you greedy fat lummox?" So what does Alfred do? Does he storm off in some kingly huff? No, Alfred the Great is a man of the people. He's like some 9th century Che Guevara figure. He just apologises profusely, And in some royal way that I've never quite understood, he uses the whole experience as a kind of learning curve that enables him to gather all his people together and lead them in another charge against the Vikings.
Hello, are you Mr. Morgan?
That's right.
Hello, my name's Mick Aston from the Time team.
How do you do?
This is Phil Harding. How do you do?
So, Robbie, what's the significance of this place, apart from the fact that Alfred hid in a few square miles of bog? What does it tell us?
Well, really, I suppose it is that was the kingdom of the West Saxons, or even the kingdom of the Saxon English. At one point, in the time that we're discussing this weekend, in 878, Alfred's kingdom had shrunk to the few acres that surround Athelney. The particular reason why we know so much about Alfred is from the fact that a chap called Asser, who was a Welsh friend of his and became one of his bishops, wrote a very detailed life about him. It's the only life of a Saxon king that we have of that kind. At the time that we're talking about, he was just coming up to 30. He was the fourth son of his father, and in fact the fourth son to be king. I don't suppose he ever expected to be king in his early years, with 3 elder brothers between him and the throne, but he had a horrendous situation to face, because the Danes had literally split England in two. They'd cruelly slaughtered most of the kings of places like Northumbria and East Anglia, and were obviously intent on taking the rest of England for themselves. But I think he wanted to get where people who didn't know the exact lie of the land wouldn't find him. He didn't, by all accounts, have very many followers with him, and so he ended up at the Isle of Athelney.
So who are the people who are attacking him?
Guthrum, king of the Danes, who is pursuing him, trying to find out where he is, and wreak one of those peculiarly nasty vengeances which the Vikings had up their sleeves. They practiced what was known as the blood eagle, which was a peculiarly nasty form of death in which they kind of slit the victim down the front while living, peeled back the ribs, and then flung back on either side the lungs to form a living blood eagle.
It's so disgusting.
It is absolutely revolting. And if that wasn't enough, you know, they went in for a tidy bit of crucifixion, by the way. You are talking about rather brutal, ruthless men.
Now, I've always assumed that part of this was simply black propaganda put about by the Anglo-Saxons because they were on the losing end. The Vikings really were as barbaric as they were painted.
Yeah, I mean, this was really a sacrifice to their gods. This was the way they sacrificed to Odin, basically. And so it was part of their ritual, if you like, part of their religion.
This is what it must have been like for Alfred. I can't even move, let alone run away from any Vikings. So, what happened to him? Was he split down the middle and had all his guts scooped out until his lungs were flapping around by his ears? No, of course not. We may have to take Asser's biography with a pinch or two of salt, but basically his character analysis of Alfred seems to have been about right. People trusted him, they liked him, they believed he was working in their interests, and so they followed him. And miraculously, within a year of his terrible defeat, he'd got all the people round here together and they'd marched out and they defeated the Vikings at the Battle of Edington. And that's when this weird double act started. As soon as the battle was over, saintly Alfred converted horrible Guthrum to Christianity, and immediately they started going on this strange procession all round the Somerset lowlands, all round the places where Alfred had been hiding just a few months previously, with Guthrum all dressed in white to symbolise his conversion to Christianity. It's very odd. Although actually I feel a bit like Alfred and Guthrum at the moment. It's Saturday morning. I've been wandering around this smelly marsh for the last 24 hours trying to get this story together, and I've got absolutely no idea what the archaeologists have been doing at all. I think if it's all right with you lot, I'll climb out of here and get back to the real world. Can someone give us a hand, please? Do you remember this story from your primary school days? King Alfred the Great is on the run from the Vikings, right? And he dives into this vast network of salty marshes that completely covered this area during the 9th century. and he sees this little mud hut that belongs to a swineherd and his wife, and he tells them that he's a deserter from the English army, and they agree to hide him. And the swineherd goes off and gets on with his jobs. She goes off and does her chores. And Alfred's sitting there, completely wrapped in thought, and he doesn't notice this huge black cloud pouring out of the fire, and the swineherd's wife comes back in, and she is absolutely livid. "You couldn't be bothered to keep an eye on my cakes, could you?" she says. "But you wouldn't mind shoveling them down your throat when they were baked, would you greedy fat lummox?" So what does Alfred do? Does he storm off in some kingly huff? No, Alfred the Great is a man of the people. He's like some 9th century Che Guevara figure. He just apologises profusely, and in some royal way that I've never quite understood, he uses the whole experience as a kind of learning curve that enables him to gather all his people together and lead them in another charge against the Vikings. So, is that just a little romantic tale, or was it based in historical fact? Well, the Time team is in Somerset this week, on the Somerset levels, and we're here because one particular Somerset family has got a very interesting piece of Alfred's history right on their doorstep, and they'd like us to try and sort it out for them.
Dear Time team, for over 50 years my family and I have farmed at Athelney. We are aware it is the site of Alfred's Abbey, and it is believed he had a fort here. Can you produce any evidence of those buildings and show what Athelney looked like in Alfred's time? Yours sincerely, Tim Morgan, Athelney Farm.
Operating from their base, the George Hotel in Wedmore, the Time team have just 3 days to find the answers. Right, so evidence of the fort. What did Athelney look like? And Mr. Morgan asks, why was he great?
Well, I think we can tackle the first bits about Athelney itself. I mean, the obvious thing there is to do some field walking and some geophysics and so on. Let's really have a look at what's under there, because it's been ploughed a lot, so it's fairly flattened.
It's scheduled, isn't it? So, in other words, we can't put a trench in.
No.
So, yeah, I mean, the best option, got to be field walking.
What's scheduled mean?
Well, I mean, it's a protected site. It's against the law to start disturbing a scheduled monument other than what its current land use is.
I thought archaeologists had been wrecking sites for 60, 70 years.
Oh, we have, but it's all in the name of science. I mean,
well, let's go then, shall we?
Okay, yeah.
The Isle of Athelney is in Somerset, situated here to the southwest of Wedmore and about 10 miles from Taunton.
Ah, there he is. That's great. Okay, let's all pile out and have a chat with him. Hello, are you Mr. Morgan?
That's right.
Hello, my name's Mick Aston from the Time team.
How do you do?
This is Phil Harding.
how do you do?
So, Robbie, what's the significance of this place, apart from the fact that Alfred hid in a few square miles of bog? What does it tell us?
Well, really, I suppose it is that was the kingdom of the West Saxons, or even the kingdom of the Saxon English. At one point, in the time that we're discussing this weekend, in 878, Alfred's kingdom had shrunk to the few acres that surround Athelney. The particular reason why we know so much about Alfred is from the fact that a chap called Asser, who was a Welsh friend of his and became one of his bishops, wrote a very detailed life about him. It's the only life of a Saxon king that we have of that kind. At the time that we're talking about, he was just coming up to 30. He was the fourth son of his father, and in fact the fourth son to be king. I don't suppose he ever expected to be king in his early years, with 3 elder brothers between him and the throne, but he had a horrendous situation to face, because the Danes had literally split England in two. They'd cruelly slaughtered most of the kings of places like Northumbria and East Anglia, and were obviously intent on taking the rest of England for themselves. But I think he wanted to get where people who didn't know the exact lie of the land wouldn't find him. He didn't, by all accounts, have very many followers with him, and so he ended up at the Isle of Athelney.
This hill is called Castle Hill. Local legend says there may be a castle somewhere in the area, possibly dating from the Norman period.
'Tis a fair old way up there, though, isn't it, hey?
And the landowners believe that the lost castle is sitting on top of their hill waiting to be discovered.
We asked for a nice flat site and this is what they've come up with.
But there are no clear written records and no obvious reason why a castle should be here, as there's nothing to defend. So was a castle ever built on this site? If so, who built it and why? As usual, we've got just 3 days to find out. Mind you, it's taken me the best part of 3 days just to climb up here.
Where are we going to set up base camp?
Here? At 450 feet, Castle Hill in South Somerset is the biggest hill for miles around.
Come on!
Until we sort out a vehicle route, it's a real challenge for everyone who wants to get to the top.
He adopts the rambler attitude with a rucksack on the back.
He was walking like that when he left the bar.
Jimmy! Did nobody tell you you can get a vehicle up here?
The hill lies a couple of miles northwest of the village of Crewe Kern and 1 mile southeast of Hinton St George. John's magnetic survey has given us a promising first target. It looks like there was something on the summit of Castle Hill. It's a good place to start, and Phil's wasting no time in marking out the first trench.
You ever thought of getting a job at the council? Hey?
At least we've got a good start with this fantastic geophys.
Yeah, we have. It looks as though on the top of the hill here, we've got what could be a big structure.
Yeah.
It's the prime location for some sort of tower.
Yeah. Keep. Something like that, yeah.
Do you often get stone Norman castles turning up?
You get stone keeps, even if the rest of it is timber. You get a mound with a tower on the top or a tower with a mound packed round it.
Well, we've got this lovely geophys. Where do you want to put in the first trench?
Anywhere in the middle there, just to see what we're getting.
To see what it looks like. Got everything to play for with it. But let's have a look, let's see.
Fine. Sons Andrew and Paul Irish have been fascinated by the giant hill in their backyard for as long as they can remember.
So, guys, that's in your back garden?
It is. It's been a fantastic feature of our childhood, really, having the hill there, all the stories that go with it, and yeah, a bit of an adventure playground in itself, really.
What's the local folklore that suggests that there was a castle up there?
Well, so far as we know, there was some sort of medieval castle there.
So you want us to find some definitive evidence of the castle?
It'd be fantastic. It's really hard imagining people living up on top of the hill. So it'd be incredible to try and imagine how the building was up there and how dominant it must have been in the landscape.
Let's hope we can solve the mystery for them and prove that their hill was indeed the site of a medieval castle.
Well, there we are, look. That's South Somerset.
Meanwhile, Mick and Alex have hauled themselves up the hill to survey the wider area. Down at our base camp, Alex is using some specialist computer software called Viewshed Analysis. It maps the entire area that can be seen from the top of Castle Hill.
What we do with Viewshed Analysis is we take a point in the landscape, which we've taken from up there in Castle Hill, OK, and what we then map is all the other places on the landscape that can be seen from that point, and that's what you can see in green.
That's very good, isn't it?
We can see all of this with the naked eye when we're up there, but this really helps us to map it. Just looking here at the Fosse Way, OK, the Roman road, which is something we could see parts of from up on the hill. Well, this confirms we can actually see here where the Fosse Way crosses the River Parrett.
Ah, that's a really important point to control that, isn't it?
Yeah.
I notice you've got on the map here Crow Castle here, because this might be the earlier castle, mightn't it?
Well, this is the thing. This early documentary reference we've got refers to a castle at Crook.
Yeah.
And for me, the place name, Crow Castle, is so similar to that early reference.
Yeah.
And the proximity to Crewe Kern as well, which we know was an important Anglo-Saxon market town and mint, might suggest that this is one of the first places you put a castle.
Yeah. I think you ought to go and have a look at this and see whether there's anything to see at all on the ground, but not before you've had a cup of tea.
I think I will do.
So Alex and Mark are going to investigate another contender for the castle in the documents, nearer the town of Crewe Kern. But with its spectacular views of the area, our Castle Hill is still a prime candidate. And some new finds from Rakshaw's Trench are looking very promising. So it would seem that we can take the spirit of this illustration at face value. Whether we can tie in Bartlett's view with the modern lie of the land may be another matter.
I think we need to know, don't we, where that wall is going.
Yeah.
Councillor Waugh?
Yes?
Yeah, sort of big discussions. I mean, there's a lot going on.
Like what?
We have a fairly thick wall here.
Yeah.
We have a thinner wall here. It's possible, just possible, that what you've got is the outside wall of the tower house and maybe one of the internal partitioning walls.
The crucial thing is, Tony, is what's happening here. Because you can see that the wall comes along and then it stops. And the reason it stops is that there's a big hole in there. We think it might be a ditch, we don't know. There's a big hole in there, but from that big hole, we had our one piece of pot. That big piece of German stoneware, 17th century.
Hang on. If this ditch has got a 17th century find in it and it's cutting this wall, then that means that this wall is at the very latest 17th century.
Clever old you.
Don't patronise me, Philip. You're going right into that hole if you're not careful. We can't say for sure, though, that this is the castle, can we?
No, what we need to do is to excavate in here, and if we find that that wall over here is bonded into this wall over here, then it's all one build. And if it's one build, you have to try and then explain what type of floor plan you've got here. And the best thing would be that it's the inside of the tower house.
So, in spite of Bartlett suggesting the tower house is on one side of the hill, the archaeology does suggest we've got something big and, well, tower house-ish on the other side. And if this is part of the O'Neill Tower House, then we'll have discovered one of the most important buildings in the history of this island. Because the loss of this castle set in motion a series of events that sealed the fate of the O'Neills, eventually leading to the flight of the Earls.
The flight of the Earls is a remarkable event in Irish history. Basically, the aristocracy of the whole province of Ulster leave in a single ship in 1607.
Why did they go?
This was the time in your history of the gunpowder plot.
So there's a lot of anti-Catholic sentiment about?
Yeah, and they feared there was a conspiracy against them. They heard news from Brussels that if O'Neill went to London, where he'd been summoned to court, that if he went to London, he would be arrested and presumably put in the Tower of London. So they decided to pack up and leave suddenly and in complete secrecy.
And once O'Neill relinquished Ulster, the landscape changed forever. Out went rural settlements, in came a very English sort of town.
The way was open for an English plantation of Ulster, where colonists were brought in to the country and transformed towns like this.
And this place here is the result of English colonisation?
Absolutely. This is a typical English marketplace. This area was granted to Chichester, one of the people who fought the war against O'Neill, and he brought in English settlers, establishing an Anglican church down here, a courthouse up here, and he brought law and order, from his point of view, into this part of Ulster, and most importantly, a market economy was established.
The result was that Ulster, the most Irish and Catholic province of Ireland, swiftly became the most British and Protestant. Knowing that there was a village here and knowing where to look for it are two different things. Castle Howard's extensively landscaped park and gardens cover 1,000 acres. So, where do we start? Our first clue is a patch of uneven ground right next to the house. Mick?
Yeah?
This whole lawn is covered in lumps and bumps.
I know, yeah.
Do you reckon they could be indications of where the village was?
Well, they could be, yeah. We've got this early map of, 1694, something like that. And that shows the village, and one of our first jobs is going to be to tie up this plan with what's here now on the ground, because this is before the big house and the gardens were laid out.
This 1694 map shows in great detail the layout of our village in the last decade of its life. It could be the key to our success, but it looks as if interpreting it is going to be tricky. So, Richard, where are we on that map?
Well, I think just there. That house, yeah, that little red blob.
I think we're probably where those two lines are, but we're not far apart.
Well, yeah.
Whatever the map says, what the gardeners have found around the lumps and bumps suggests they might be a good place to start.
Clearly marked. The area contains loads and loads and loads of medieval pottery. I mean, look at this lot. 13th, 14th century green glaze stuff, including wasters, rubbish from pottery production. And this isn't just any old shed, this is from a huge, great vessel. So you're not eating porridge out of this.
Yeah.
So
OK, Mick, what's the strategy?
Well, I think we've got the geophys going in at the moment on this area of mounds. We could pick a mound and dig it anyway, but I'd like to wait and just see what the geophys comes up with, and then we'll pop a hole in there if you're happy with us putting it in. I think I can handle that.
Simon, this isn't just a posh house, it's your home, isn't it?
That's true, absolutely.
So how do you feel about us being here, crawling all over it for 3 days?
Well, I think there've been enough question marks about where the old castle was and where the village was and where the church was too for so long that actually this is very exciting from our point of view. Be careful with the lawns, put everything back properly and neatly.
Like you tell Phil, because I'm not. While geophys survey the lumps and bumps for any traces of a village, in our magnificent incident room in the castle, Stuart's getting to grips with the original 1694 map.
This is... What's the material?
It's vellum.
It's vellum. 17th century jigsaw puzzle. It is. Right. And there you have Henderskelf. So it's like the whole village has just appeared in front of me. It's fantastic.
This beautiful map gives us a number of targets. The road through the village and the houses along it, as well as the old castle of Henderskelf and its outbuildings, and finally, the church. Stuart's task is to work out exactly where they all are on the ground today. The current interpretation has the village here. Henderskelf Castle appears to be unreachable under Castle Howard, but some of the houses along the street appear to coincide with the lumps and bumps. Or at least they did, until Stuart reinterpreted the map and moved the whole village 50 metres further west.
If Stu's right...
You've not been waiting for me, have you?
No, but carry on anyway.
Carry on. Yeah. Well, that's the mag.
Hang on, I've no idea where we are. Where are we in the ground?
You're here.
Right.
This is the area with the humps and bumps. The track behind us is there. OK?
Yeah.
So the pipeline running along the edge. It's very noisy. It could be lots of bonfires, rubbish. Right. It could be brick and tile, or it might just be pot wasters.
Right.
And now you've just said you don't want to put in a trench here.
No, what I think is, if Stuart's right, looking at the early map, then more or less from here to that hedge is where the outbuildings of the castle, whatever it was by 1690 was, and the village really starts from here and goes that way.
Oh.
So if we were...
So what if we...
Well, no,
surveyed
the
there?
point is, if we were only interested in the village properties, we'd be looking that way. I mean, I think we should do both. I think we should go for one of your hot spots that might be castle or might be village, but I think we should also dig a trench somewhere out there on the basis of the map, even without the geophys, and just see if that's where we've got village stuff. So 2 trenches.
Quite frankly, I think we ought to get moving. This may look just like a nice little spring natter between 4 people, but if you look round here, you will see all these people waiting to start digging.
We've got one ditch in there.
Yeah.
We've got another one in here,
yeah,
which has got our tripod and our picture in.
So you're calling this a tripod now?
Yeah, well, it's got 3 legs. Look, it's got one there, and one underneath. And this is the picture that would have sat on the top of it. What we don't know is whether it's actually sitting in the ditch or whether it's in a much later feature.
And then is there another ditch here?
Well, I'm standing on the natural. Here's another spine, this yellowy stuff. But here, this dark stuff is another ditch running parallel with the others. And they're all heading towards this pile of stones. Now, we've opened this up, and look, we've got an area of clay coming round there.
Phil's also found bits of a crucible, making him think that this could be a furnace for ironworking. The ditch runs under the furnace, so there are at least 2 periods of activity here. Complicated site, isn't it?
It's great.
Just as Mick predicted, this is looking like a site that's got traces of people living here over thousands of years.
Yeah, we need to be able to...
According to Stuart, it's easy to see why. He's been working on a graphic that shows how this landscape looked before it was drained. It shows that Francis's Field, on this ridge of higher ground, would have been one of the few dry places to live in this area. Not only that, but Stuart's keen to point out to me that this hill next door was once a very important site. This, apparently, was the site of Skipsea Castle, the centre of the whole of Holderness in medieval times.
But it's actually much more than that. These earthworks here are actually spectacular. I think that actually starts in the early prehistoric period. It's even Neolithic. A huge great mound situated in the bottom of this bog out here. This was one of those meres, one of those lakes, and this would have been a spectacular monument there. Then this big ridge round here is probably an Iron Age enclosure, very close to that earlier monument. And then finally, when the Normans come along, they put their castle on top of that mound and reuse all this as part of their Motte Bailey Castle.
So this was an important strategic site in both prehistoric and medieval times, and it's right next door to us. Suddenly, I'm starting to get excited about the possibilities of what we might find tomorrow. Last year, an amateur archaeologist was walking through these woods when he came across a load of lumps and bumps, and they were very lumpy and bumpy. He was told that this site played a crucial role in the defence of this island during the Second World War, and he realised that it needed to be looked at before it was lost forever. So he talked to Time Team about it, and they said that no one has ever dug a site like this before, because although this is British soil, these defences aren't British. They're German, part of the vast complex of defences built by Hitler to turn Jersey into an island fortress. Oh, and by the way, that amateur archaeologist was me. So I'm going to be under quite a lot of pressure over the next few days. 70 years later, the islands are littered with the remains of that occupation.
During the occupation period, 40 to 45, we're talking about some 65,000 plus mines being laid in the island and probably over 26,000 tonnes of other munitions.
And it means for the next 3 days, our archaeologists are going to have to be rather careful when it comes to any small finds they uncover.
So, are you still happy to go ahead with this?
I think I feel slightly more cautious about that whole thing.
So, with the briefing over, it's time to get our first trench in.
Now you say, don't hit it hard, and then the first thing you do is you go.
And it's essential we're vigilant, because our site at Les Gillettes is a heavily fortified German anti-aircraft battery that overlooked the airport and dominated the surrounding landscape. Now hidden under a canopy of trees, this rare wartime RAF reconnaissance photograph shows the site in its prime, and it suggests it once dripped with heavy artillery.
We're seeing a lot more than's on that air photo, which must be a real testament to the German camouflage guys.
And we've assembled our own army of experts to decipher all these lumps and bumps. So, with geophysics somewhat kiboshed by the vegetation, we're going for the old-fashioned approach. Our first trench over a possible gun emplacement has gone in based on the aerial photograph and Stuart's surveying skills. And he's already given us a position for a second trench.
There's a whole series of structures here that look as if they're buildings associated with the emplacement that Phil's working on.
In spite of being only 70 years old, we haven't been able to find any written records for this site. They were probably destroyed by the Germans before they surrendered.
Oh, I think you've got precisely what we had before.
But these 20mm diameter shells do suggest that Trench 1 is the site of a 20mm anti-aircraft gun. And this gun would have been just one of thousands of German weapons that swamped Jersey from 1940 onwards. We've also now opened 2 more trenches, this time over strange features that John's managed to identify from his severely curtailed geophys.
Lovely.
And one of them has just thrown up a find that's got us completely stumped.
wondered whether it was part of a field kitchen, but that's not going to work for filling it full of soup, is it? So
it looks too fragile for something like a gun mounting, doesn't it?
Doesn't it just?
Well, there's our first mystery on this site. We have 2 days left to find out what that is.
And people say, why do you bother digging it? You know what everything is.
But we have sorted out Trench 1.
It's not just a bank that's thrown up to go round a gun.
As Phil's discovered that the defences built on this hillside were engineered to last.
What we seem to get is this inner stone-built revetment, and then we've got this fine-grained material pushed against the outside of it to make the actual bank.
I mean, that makes complete sense. You don't want enemy shell fire or bullets striking stones. So you put the soft stuff out there and that will absorb the energy of incoming ammunition from the enemy.
So our first trench can confirm that this earthwork is a 20mm gun emplacement, and it was strategically placed to shoot down low-flying aircraft.
Phil's emplacement up on the top here, on the highest point, that's a 20mm gun. That's designed to be quick-moving. It's got a rapid rate of fire.
And as we know this shape is a 20mm gun, we can confidently say that all these features are also 20mm guns, which isn't a bad result for one day's digging. These larger 88mm gun pits will be our main target for tomorrow as we begin to extend our investigation, because it's now clear that this whole hillside operated as one big settlement. So far, we've only been digging about 1/3 of this battery, and Stuart feels it's about time to investigate another target at the other end of the site.
From other flat batteries, you know what to expect. There's the guns, and then there has to be a fire and command control centre close to the guns, and sometimes have a shelter for the crew underneath, like a bunker or something like that. Not necessarily concrete, could be dug down into the rock or the earth.
Well, I mean, the results don't necessarily suggest concrete bunker, but certainly something that's going deep into the ground and appears to have collapsed and be full of rubble.
That's hard ground, isn't it?
So we're opening a new trench over a potential bunker, and very quickly it becomes clear there's something rather interesting deep down.
But it's red here. There's some tile.
Oh, right, it's a tile, is it?
Oh, brick.
And then we discover the last thing we need.
Ian, I think that's perhaps where we stop, because I think we've got some form of ordnance going on.
And this time it's not a stray bullet.
Here, right behind us.
It looks like a very real, very live artillery shell.
Hi.
These rock-cut trenches would appear to show the determination of the German troops here to defend their positions against Allied attack. But there could be a chance that the soldiers didn't do the digging themselves, because our site overlooks the most impressive and most chilling monument to the German occupation. About 100 feet above my head, Phil and the rest of the team are excavating our German anti-aircraft battery. But down here, there's a much more tangible example of the German occupation. This is the Jersey War Tunnels, originally created as an artillery workshop and military hospital for the Germans. But if ever there's a statement that says, we're powerful, we're here, and we're not going away, this is it. Hewn out of solid rock, the tunnels are a testament to German engineering. But they're also a testimonial to the brutal Nazi ethos that some people deserved to be treated as subhuman. There is something phenomenally bleak about that unfinished tunnel, isn't there?
There is. It was built by people who worked for the organisation Todt, and these were voluntary labour, there's coerced labour, forced labour, slave labour. People from Russia, from Poland, from Belarus, from Ukraine, people who in the Nazi racial hierarchy were right down there.
Did many of them die?
Yes, yes, hundreds in Alderney and around about 100 in Jersey.
It's a sobering reminder as we reach the end of day 2 that what we're digging had a real and lasting impact on the people of Jersey.
Stuart, this turned up earlier.
And we're still discovering yet more evidence of the force used to occupy this island.
Well, it's an 88 shell case, that's for sure. Well, I think the actual gain for the primer of the shell case is still present, so it's potentially dangerous.
Back at the heart of the site, the scale of the gun emplacements that fired those shells is now evident.
That looks a bit like a firing step there.
Well, that's what we think. This one's different to all these other shelters in that it's got that out there. Now, if you look through, actually what you've got is a field of fire down that trench system and covering that area out in the woodland beyond. So it makes sense to have a sort of secondary defence line here.
Defending this hill from a land-based attack appears to have become more important in the latter years of the war, and we're now confident another one of our trenches is also part of this refortification. It's a machine gun post. Heck of a lot of hard work. You can see it was cut out of the solid rock, and it's part of the network of defences that we can see pretty clearly on the 1944 aerial photo. But intriguingly, we're starting to find things that aren't on that photo, like this big structure behind you, Martin. What is it?
Right, well, it begins life. You can see it on there. It's the same sort of position as that first trench fill did, but they've dished in one side of it here to create this big bank there. So it's stopped being about anti-aircraft defence, and actually it's become part of this system, and it's providing extra fire support for the guys who are down there in your machine gun.
So it's a shifting from attack to defence?
Quite right, yes.
How does that tie in with the history?
Well, this photo was taken in August, I think, 1944. And if you think June 1944, everything has changed because you've had the Allied landings in Normandy. So suddenly the Allies, they're only 14 miles away in France. So it's a completely different game they're suddenly having to play here. They are now cut off not just from Britain, they're also cut off from France.
So the irony is that the Germans here, who were the besiegers, had now suddenly become the besieged.
Completely. So we always think of D-Day as this big moment when the war turned, but things just got worse for everybody here.
We can now concentrate on working out what we've actually uncovered on site. And it's clear that by the end of the war, the Germans had built a sophisticated complex of trenches against ground attack.
I just can't believe how big this thing is.
Meanwhile, Rackshire and Phil, fresh from the beach, have revealed an 88mm emplacement as robust as any Roman archaeology we've ever uncovered.
We got that little bunker area over there. We can actually see now where all the timber revetment is. But the main thing is, this is a seriously big piece of engineering for a seriously big gun.
While over in Faye's Trench, we've also got something equally robust. But this time, it's underground.
Well, down at the bottom now, we've actually got the base of this structure. And what we think we've got, you see the depth of it, is some form of bunker. And we've got all these cables and wires coming in. So I think we've got a communication bunker.
Could this be the brains of the whole operation?
I don't think it's big enough to be the brains of the whole operation, but potentially some of it, yes.
This building here is a command and control centre. That's where Faye's digging.
Yes, right
in that
behind
trench
us, that
down
trench.
there, yeah.
So with all this information, what does our man in the sandpit think?
Because we've excavated around 20mm battery, you know what that's like. We can see others on the aerial photograph.
Yep.
And we've got a number of them ringing around the site. The 88mm ones are square. They're very different to the 20mm ones. There's a nice triangular pattern of 3 there.
Yeah.
And over in where we're standing, nice triangle geometric pattern. So you can imagine, if they're firing at 15 rounds a minute, that's 45 rounds from each of these batteries a minute, times 2, 90 rounds a minute. These batteries can pump up into the sky. That's serious air defence, is that. But you can see how they just went from being an anti-aircraft battery suddenly to having to think almost in infantry mode. This is the weakest side. They're expecting attacks up here, and you can see they're also, in this trench system, they're digging a trench along the back of the hedge line now, and they're going to use the hedge and the bank underneath it as part of the defences against any attack here. It's not just anti-aircraft, it's about controlling the airfield, and it's an anti-invasion defence at the same time.
So we've got a fortified enclosure as sophisticated as any Iron Age hill fort, with 6 massive guns capable of throwing up a barrage of exploding shells, while 20mm gun emplacements dealt with lower flying aircraft. But by the end, it was a fortress where starving troops lived in fear of invasion, and the 88mm guns, including the one in Phil's trench, were now lowered to overlook the island below.
Well, basically, we've got a sort of what I like to think of as a cross between a Roman fort and a wooden box. The Roman fort bit is the bank that goes all the way around. That gives you your protection. The wooden box bit is the fact that all these edges would have been revetted with timber. And in fact, when you'd have come in here, you'd have seen wooden sides and wooden flooring, and in each corner you'd have had an ammunition box there and an ammunition box there and probably one over there. But the central part is really what strikes you. It is an enormous hole that is filled up with concrete.
Yeah, and right in the middle of it, there's the one thing that's missing, which is that enormous metal killing machine.
Absolutely. But you can just see the imprint of where it once stood. You've got these bolts here where it's actually been fixed to the concrete. And clearly at the end of the war, they cut them all off except one, and they lifted the gun away and thank God took it away.
2 years ago, a couple of local archaeologists stumbled on this, a vast, undiscovered earthwork hidden here in these Herefordshire woods. They thought it could be man-made, even prehistoric, but they got really excited when they discovered this aerial photo, which appears to show a large curve here in the snow, which is in this field adjacent to the forest. And they wondered if the bank and ditch there might be linked to the curve here, except the two features are 500 metres apart. If they're at opposing ends of one big structure encircling this entire hilltop, then the archaeologists believe they found one of the largest Iron Age monuments in all Britain. Dinmore Hill is a vast promontory flanked by escarpments to the north and south and surrounded on three sides by the wonderfully named River Lugg. And it's the setting for a curious puzzle.
But the thing is, hill fort means almost anything. It could be about soldiers, it could be a communal centre, it could be a village, it could even be a large cattle corral.
But of course that begs the question, is it Iron Age?
Well, exactly. And that's the other thing, Tony. I mean, some of these hilltop enclosures could be up to 6,000 years old.
Keith, what other information have we got about this site? Has any other archaeology been done?
None.
Any survey work?
None.
So, apart from an aerial photo and an old ditch, and your assertion that it could be Iron Age, really, this dig could be about any period in history, couldn't it?
Well, that's life.
That's time, Team Francis. This site feels suspiciously like the lucky dip at the Archaeological Fun Fair. Still, Iron Age hill fort. At least we know what we're looking for. The purpose of hill forts is the subject of heated debate, but they do at least all have one or two things in common. A set of vast earthworks in one continuous circuit, usually with a couple of entrances and some houses or storerooms inside. So if we've got one here, it shouldn't be hard to miss. Except this site is more than 40 acres. It's huge. We've got our work cut out just surveying it, which is why John's recruited a small army of geophysics boffins to lend a hand. And there's no hanging about down at the other end of the site either. It's not even 10:30, and we already seem to be opening our first trench. I haven't even finished my tea yet.
So what I plan to do is go down a little bit further, see if it's looking ditch-like, right? And then I'll double up the width and we'll go back about 40 metres.
40 metres?
Well, there are basically two things we've got to discover, Tony. We've got to get the ditch, and then we want to go on the inside, because I want to get the very inside of the hill fort, if that's what it is.
We're looking for the big ditch and bank we saw on Keith's aerial photo. And as always, we need finds. Pottery, bone, metalwork, anything that might tell us what this was and when it was built.
Is that going to be the back of the rampart?
Yeah, it looks like a rear revetment wall, possibly. The stone underneath there.
We found the first tantalising signs of how this huge bank was constructed.
That's nice, isn't it, laid in there?
It's classic. This could be really well built. There's another one there.
Yeah. But this would be an indicator that it might be an Iron Age construction.
Not only that, it could be an indicator that this is an entrance.
Wow, Matt, so it was all colluvium?
Yes, hidden underneath this. Yeah. There's your ditch. There it is, look. There's the, well, you can see there's the grey natural there. There's the line of the edge of the ditch, and then there's the fill of the ditch, the kind of blue-grey silt. Perfect.
Better still, our environmental expert, Mike Allen, has got an intriguing find.
Oh, look at that. That's oak, isn't it?
Yeah, this is oak, and the auguring did show that we might have waterlogging at the bottom of this ditch, and indeed we have. And this is, as you can't really say, it's probably oak, but it's also probably a stake, so a wooden stake driven into the ground, and it's now fallen into the ditch.
This is more like it. We've found the giant ditch we saw on Keith's aerial photo, and it looks like it may have been defended by a palisade of sharpened stakes on the bank behind it. The archaeology in the woods is beginning to look pretty spectacular too.
Wow, that's fantastic, Phil. You've got real stratigraphy there.
I know, it's a cracking section.
So you've got at least 3 phases, possibly 4.
It's a very, very complicated story.
Yeah.
But the best, if you like, is yet to come, because here's the back of the rampart. Look at these stones tipping down like that. That's the back of the rampart, and it's separated by this. It's a solid stone wall.
This is great stuff. Evidence of phases indicates that whoever built this bank came back to reinforce it again and again over some considerable time. More importantly, it looks like there may have been a wooden palisade at this end of the site too. But whether these are 2 sections of one continuous earthwork that encircled the top of this hill, we don't yet know.
And when you start to look at the physical evidence that we've got, it's very interesting. Now, this is where Phil's digging just here. We can see the bank and ditch. It comes through the woodland down there. It's very well preserved, but no evidence at all of it coming round here, as you would expect with Iron Age hill forts. It doesn't happen here. And when you look at all hill forts, they've all got continuity of defences around circuits. That's a very common thing. Absolutely no evidence that's ever occurred at all.
What do you think it is?
Well, what we've got, I think, coming across here, first of all, is something called a cross-ridge dyke. Now, this is a sort of land boundary.
This is Iron Age?
Well, they can be used in the Iron Age. They often actually predate the Iron Age. It can be Bronze Age in date and continue to be used through into the Iron Age and even beyond that as boundaries. The postulation was that that was one large hill fort coming all the way around here. But there's no evidence these features come back along here. If you look at the aerial photograph closely, can you see that bank and ditch, which was extant in 1946 when this photograph was taken, actually turns a corner and comes back round here. There's absolutely no evidence it continued towards the escarpment edge there.
Have you told the others yet?
Not yet. You can do that for me if you like.
For that. We may be splitting into opposing factions, but at least Phil's happy. He thinks his ditch is one of the most impressive bits of prehistoric archaeology he's ever seen.
What is it that's so wonderful about this trench, then?
It's just the sheer scale of being in the bottom of this ditch, and you really have to get into the bottom of it just to appreciate just how big it is. Look, when you cast your eye up there, look at the top of the rampart.
Yeah.
Think about a lot of this material that's in this ditch would have come from the top of that rampart. Just think of the scale of it.
And this was all cut by hand?
Absolutely, Tony. It all cut through this solid rock, just using people with their bare hands and literally iron tools and picks. I mean, it's taken us half a day to do this with a machine. Just think how much longer it would have taken to do it by hand.
How long do you reckon it is in either direction?
In either direction, about 300 metres, so it's at 600 metres overall. And the interesting thing is, it looks as though we've probably got the entrance here.
Out on site, the chaos continues.
Francis, this is madness! You closed that trench down this morning because it's raining so much, but you're stuck in another one.
Well, the thing is, Tony, we can't just stop. We've only got 3 days, and I'm not having people digging these trenches. It's just being done by a machine, so there's no health and safety problems. I actually extended that other trench over there, but there's a flat bit behind the bank, and that's where normally you'd expect to find houses. We didn't find any, so I then came over here, but this is another flat area. You can see we're in a natural hollow, and this again is where you'd expect to have houses, but you're protected from the winds blowing over there.
And have you found anything?
Nothing. Absolutely not a sausage.
So are you going to keep on digging more trenches, or are you going to stop and think now?
I'm going to stop and think and have a bath, I think.
It's the end of day 2. We've dug here, here and here, but we've failed to find any evidence of people living on this hill. And yet we've got 2 giant earthworks. This place is still a total enigma. Back in the incident room, Mike's poring over the remains of this wooden stake from Trench 1. Painstaking microscopic work like this tells us as much about this site as the big archaeology does.
The woodland isn't just a load of trees, it's a resource which they are using and utilising. So from this little piece of wood, we can suggest there's quite a complex, organised society somewhere out there managing the woodland for construction.
If Mike's right, the people who built the earthwork were also coppicing trees to produce wood for fencing and cutting back trunks for bigger timbers. Back on site, there's no sign that the earthwork continued through our new trench. Phil's face says it all.
Oh, hi, John. Ian, hold on a sec. Well, I think we're just getting to the top of the natural there. Can you see the grey? Can you show me exactly where we are, then?
We've put the trench in what we think is the break, the entrance here. This has to be a ditch. Whether it's Iron Age or not, that's up to you.
If we can complete the circuit, we'll have proved beyond reasonable doubt this was an Iron Age hill fort. With just 5 minutes left, we haven't got long.
Really? The issue is whether this is actual, real edge.
Could be.
No, it's not.
Is it collapsed?
Oh, hang on, no, that is.
Is that hard?
That's real.
OK.
That's it. That's the edge there.
It's 6 o'clock. It's been tough, wet and muddy, but our time's up.
Oh, you got something?
Yeah, well, the geophysics showed this huge ditch coming along here with a break in it just in front of me. And that's what we've got. I'm standing in the terminus of it here at the end, and you can see it's massive, cut straight through the bedrock.
Do you think that this ditch aligns with the other ditch that you were digging down there yesterday?
Yeah, it does. We've clearly got it on the geophysics going straight through this field and then curving off around there.
Francis, it's been a site all about ditches.
It has, Tony, and what ditches. I mean, over there in the wood, that sensational deep ditch and the bank that went with it, typically Iron Age, and the way that all the ditches we've looked at are subtly different suggests to me that they were probably dug by different groups of people who came to this area as a sort of central meeting place. Think of it as a sort of Iron Age Stonehenge. It's where people came to meet.
At last, we've got confirmation of a single giant earthwork. But this was no ordinary hill fort. A radiocarbon date from our final trench indicates that its earliest phase was built 3,000 years ago in the late Bronze Age. So although Stuart's vision of a cross-ridge dike wasn't right, his instincts were spot on. We think the western section was reinforced 1,000 years later in the Iron Age to form a grand entrance, the gateway into a giant assembly area where surrounding communities gathered to perform religious rites and celebrate seasonal festivals. In my hand is a piece of Roman brick. It's not very smart. We've probably seen hundreds of bits of brick like this before, except when you turn it over, you can see that nearly 2,000 years ago, someone scrawled a list of names in it. They were probably some of the 1,000 or so soldiers who were stationed here at Venovia, one of the largest Roman forts in northern England. So we're stepping outside the fort's imposing ramparts to uncover the lost world of Venovia's vicus, the bars, the shops, and beyond them the cemeteries, which would have been such an essential part of life and death for Vincentus and co. We've never had the opportunity to dig an entire vicus before, probably because it's such a massive undertaking, and we've got just 3 days to do it. Venovia, or Binchester as it's known today, lies on Deer Street, the major Roman road that ran from York through Hadrian's Wall to the far north of the empire. This strategic route was lined with forts, the backbone of the Roman military presence in Britain. And the one at Venovia is a fantastic excavated example. It's a classic layout of barracks for up to 1,000 men, kitchens and stables, and a commandant's house, complete with a luxurious bathhouse. All surrounded by a massive stone wall. A And beyond that wall was the Vicus, the civilian settlement on which the fort depended. But so far, archaeologists have almost completely ignored it.
There have been loads of people digging inside the fort, but actually only one person has ever had a look outside in the Vicus area. It's this chap, the Reverend Hoople, in 1891, and he produced this very interesting plan of buildings here, and we've got sketches of what he found. Now, these are really substantial bits of masonry, lots of different phases.
They do look like illustrations in a late 19th century children's book, don't they? And we have been ripped off by antiquarians before who've come up with all these fantasies which you actually can't substantiate. Is this stuff real?
Well, we've got something that can help us decide, because look at that aerial photograph. I mean, this is sensational. Here we've got Deer Street, and look, what looks exactly like these buildings very clearly here. I mean, you can even see that looks like the long building there. I mean, it just looks wonderful. It looks like this is a really accurate plan.
So if you just go around the outside, then we'll just crisscross it with lines, cut them into curves about that.
So we're opening our first trench over the area dug by Hoople in the 19th century. And it should contain substantial stone buildings belonging to the Vicus. But all this area, including the fort, is a scheduled ancient monument, and that means our digging options here are very limited. The entire area on that side of this fence is scheduled, so we can only put in one trench there. But given how big that fort was, we think the Vicus might extend over here, which is unscheduled, where we can put in as many trenches as we like, if we get the evidence. Stu, any joy so far?
Well, this field looks rather interesting, Tony, because we've got some aerial photographs. There's the fort, that's the fence you've just walked along. Can you see that angle there? That looks like it might be an annex, a ditch feature or something, an annex onto the fort. Either that or it's even a remnant of an earlier fort or something of that sort of order. And there's another aerial photograph which shows a road coming out of the entrance to the fort, heading over that way. So, yeah, there's a possibility of lots in here.
And almost immediately, we've got our first find.
Roman. Our first piece of Samian.
While Phil works his way through the plough soil, our resident historian has been casting his somewhat sceptical eyes over our geophys.
Well, I don't think it's a temple, because a Romano-Celtic temple wouldn't normally turn up here, which is that kind of shape. I think it's much more likely to be a mausoleum.
Why do you say that?
Well, it reminds me of a mausoleum just outside Rome on the Appian Way, which consists of an enclosure wall and then with a central tomb in the middle.
So what's the difference between a temple and a mausoleum?
A mausoleum is a place that's dedicated to the memory of a deceased person. You might actually worship there religiously. You know, you go and perhaps offer sacrifices to the spirits of your departed. But I'd guess that that's more likely to turn out to be the mausoleum of maybe a commanding officer of this fort.
Well, finding the last resting place of a Roman commander doesn't happen every day. And I have to admit the geophysics results are some of the most striking we've ever seen on Time Team. So, with a strong sense of anticipation, we open our third trench over what looks like one of the walls of our possible mausoleum.
That's almost exactly the line of the wall where that sheep track is.
We'll hold you to that.
You know what I said? Almost exactly.
Ah, almost exactly.
Yeah.
I've never known a sheep walk in a straight line.
No. A bit like yourself, isn't it? After the beer.
After a few beers, yeah.
We put this rather long trench in here because earlier today John did some geophys here and he came up with two things which look suspiciously like ditches. Naomi, can I come in your trench?
Of course you can.
Yeah.
This is the edge of one of our ditches. This is the ditch fill. OK, and if we come this way,
yeah,
where this lighter patch is, this is our other edge, so it's quite a wide ditch.
That is a heck of a big ditch, isn't it?
Yeah.
What's that there?
Well, here it's just something we're just uncovering. It looks like a nice piece of mortaria.
Which is?
Which is kind of like a pestle and mortar for grinding food.
And this stuff here?
Again, just another nice, chunky vessel.
Both Roman?
It's definitely looking that way.
So does that mean that we can date this ditch as Roman?
I should say so, yeah.
I've built up the basic topography of the landscape as it is now. And on top of it, I've dropped up what would have been the fort. And the first thing I've noticed is half the fort's hanging off the landscape.
I mean, there is a very good reason for that, because this side of the fort has actually slipped away. There's been a big landslip on this side here by the river, and it literally has gone. So it looks rather nice, but you're going to have to lose that side of it.
Okay.
But what that illustrates really well is this high ground that the fort sits on, because it actually sits on effectively a raised island, doesn't it? The river on one side, the valley down here. That's a really dramatic piece of topography for dominating this major crossing of the river here.
Very distinctive.
So we extend Trench 2 into the area we hope's an early fort and continue to excavate our possible mausoleum trench. We've now uncovered this fantastic wall, and we need to work out how it relates to our potential cremation urn.
So that's cleaning it really nicely now, isn't it? With that should be the inner face, according to the geophys, of whatever we've got here.
I'll take your word for that.
With not one but two discoveries of potentially national significance, our hunt for the Vicus takes a back seat, with only Matt left scraping away in search of the substantial stone buildings recorded in the 19th century. Matt, we've got a mausoleum down there, we've got cremation burials, we've got a brand new Roman fort that no one's ever seen before. What have you got in your trench?
Well, apart from all this stone rubble, we've got hope, and we've got a day and a half as well, so we'll see how it goes.
The mausoleum alone would be a major discovery, but we also think we might have discovered a huge earlier fort. We know the fort that's visible today was built around 130 AD, so to prove this one's earlier, we need datable evidence.
So now you've got some decent edges to the ditch, you can get down into it now, I suppose.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see how deep this goes now.
I reckon it's going to actually come a fair old way down.
I hope so.
Have you got anything coming out of it?
Yeah, we've got some nice bits. There's this lovely Samian bowl.
That's nice, isn't it? You've got a date on that?
Late 1st, early 2nd century.
Back at the
And
heart
you're
of the
not,
site,
you're nowhere
the
near the
scale of
bottom of the
gun
ditch. So if we get in
emplacements that fired
1st
those
century
shells is now
stuff
evidence.
this far up, makes you wonder what you got from lower down.
It's a promising start. These late 1st century finds take us back before the construction of the stone fort in around 130 AD. But there's no dating evidence in our first trench. In fact, despite Matt's earlier optimism, there's little sign of the stone buildings we'd expected to find.
So have you sorted this out now, Matt?
Yep, we've got it. That is the bottom of Hoopel's trench, finally.
Right.
You can see, though, that there's none of this lovely masonry left. And we know that's the bottom of his trench because, look, the most exciting find of Trench 1 so far.
Oh, well, that's not Roman, is it, at
Not at
all?
all.
You're
getting
good at this, aren't you? Yeah, it's a bit of 19th century willow pattern.
And that was from it's from down there in the backfill, so that's confirmed that it's Victorian.
So, once he'd done those nice drawings of all that nice masonry, somebody must have pinched the stonework, in fact.
This is the first row of mausoleums to be found in Britain for 150 years, and only the second ever to be discovered. It's a find of national significance. Towards the end of the day, John started to get really excited about an area over here where he found this mysterious circular thing. So, Phil, have we found our mysterious circular feature?
We have, but it's not circular, it's square. This is it. You've got that straight edge there, and there's another straight edge there.
Yeah.
I think you could interpret that as a square mausoleum.
Is it a mausoleum for a very small person or a pet?
No, not at all. I mean, it's perfectly feasible to have a cremation in there, and you can actually get a burial in there. I mean, when you look at the size of Ian against the inside there, you could actually squeeze a human body in there and get it in there, no problem.
So there could still be a burial there?
There could well be a burial in there.
Bridge, it's a nice piece of masonry over there.
Yeah, I'm glad you noticed it. It is indeed. It looks to be part of a column. Can you see this curved edge around here? That would have been the front of it.
Why is it flat on the other side?
Well, it's really been put up for aesthetic reasons rather than structural. So, of course, as it was standing there, this flat side would have been flush against the wall of the mausoleum, and then you would have just seen that curved column on the front. So there was no need to actually build a round column.
Yeah, but this is only half the story, isn't it? You've got something fairly small over there, but you've got this massive building here. You've got a wall there, a return there, a wall there, a return there. It's huge.
Ah, but you see, you're taking the obvious interpretation, which was exactly the interpretation that I came to when I first came here, and thinking that you did have this one big building. But you see, what we've got on the geophysics is this, which actually contradicts that there's going to be a wall across there, literally going across there, and we have no archaeological evidence for it.
So we're going to continue digging for the wall that Geophys says is here, while extending our trench to see if these two outer walls do join up. The truth is, it's mid-afternoon on day 3 and the layout of the mausolea is still a puzzle. Raysan and Guy are looking at possible models. Guy suspects each mausoleum was made up of a central chamber surrounded by a walled enclosure. But to confirm this, we need to find all 4 walls.
Oh! That's it, it's it there, isn't it? Yeah. There, look, there it is, it's pig grit.
This has been a truly remarkable dig. We came to this hill in search of a vicus, the civilian settlement that supported the Roman fort, and in the process we uncovered an entire lost landscape. We located the vicus along the road on either side of the fort, but we also discovered a huge earlier fort which pushes the history of Vonovia back to the very beginning of Roman occupation in the north, and a row of 3 mausolea, the first group to be discovered in Britain for 150 years. We came here in search of the living, but found a city of the dead, a street lined with grand tombs, a little piece of the Roman world in the far north of the empire. And at its heart, perhaps the grandest mausoleum of all.
OK, Antonius, my brother and fellow comrade soldier at the mighty fort of Vonovia up there, we've come down the Street of Tombs to venerate the memory of our great ancestor, our great-great-grandfather, the mighty general who once acted as a soldier here, and we've come down to his tomb. Now we've got to go through the vast mighty door that would have once been here, pivoting there on iron, and in we come to the mausoleum area, and towering above us here is his grave, with an inscription that records his name, his mighty exploits, and around here other graves of his brother and his cousins, other members of the family. And these are the men who make you and me important people in the fort today, and our great hope one day is that we'll be buried here too.
Join Time Team on Patreon to access exclusive 3D models, masterclasses and behind-the-scenes insights.